Today's a big day for Libby Hall.
Coffee? Yeah.
How you feeling today?
You're good. Nervous, but I'm ready.
She's waited 18 years for this moment. Over more than a decade, this man, Stephen Mitchell, sexually assaulted 6 young girls. Those girls, now all women, are about to find out the fate of the man who caused them a lifetime of trauma.
I haven't apologised to that little girl and said, I'm sorry for not protecting you. It's a dark place.
Working on particularly hard climbs at the moment, so if they're not falling off, they're not climbing hard enough.
Stephen Mitchell was a youth worker in Canberra in the 90s before he established himself as a rock climbing coach.
This is a pretty soft harness. It protects you because when you fall onto the rope, this is what catches you. This is basically your life on the rope.
Libby Hall was his biggest star.
Okay, I'm ready to climb.
Freedom that I instantly felt climbing was incredible. And I knew as soon as I started and I won my first ever competition, I wanted to be the best.
In 2005, Libby achieved her dream, winning the speed category at the World Junior Rock Climbing Championships in Beijing. But she was paying a terrible price.
Sexually abusing me, taking advantage. He was a monster. It was multiple times over many, many years, yeah. It's a life sentence of trauma.
We believe that we've got a crime scene out in Palmerston.
Australian Federal Police Detective Paul Kalatsis has been investigating Mitchell for the past 2 years.
And my acting sergeant came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you busy? I've got a ex-Commonwealth Games athlete coming in. She wants to talk about something that occurred in the 90s.
That athlete was a gymnast on an Australian Institute of Sport scholarship. She told the police Mitchell had begun grooming her in 1994.
He's had access to victims for decades. At that point, I knew this had the potential to be quite a significant investigation.
Mitchell's first victim, though, wasn't an athlete.
Over the years, it's manifested itself in a lot of different ways. Sometimes sleeplessness, lack of self-worth, and anxiety. Hold on.
Indepth Visser first met Mitchell in the early 90s when she was 9, after he befriended her mother.
I adored him. He treated me like I was the most special thing he'd ever come across, and I believed that and ran with it. The term's grooming.
Where Mitch took that relationship from there, it was incredibly manipulative.
He lived at his mother's house, but he didn't live in the house. He lived out the back. I think of it as a shed. He would hold me all night and press himself up against me. He would rub me on my private parts, tell me I was gorgeous and good. I loved the attention, and I was petrified.
Mitchell spent more time with Indepth as she entered high school.
I think he gave me the wedding ring when I was about 13. It meant we were together. So it had to be a secret.
At the time, Mitchell was working in a part-time job at a Canberra youth centre, frequently arriving and leaving with Indepth. A suspicious youth worker spoke up.
They did terminate him, but from what they held, it wouldn't be something that they would report. It would be a suspicious contact at the best.
Mitchell also had another part-time job at the Institute of Sport, hosting tour groups and running programs for kids. His access allowed him to masquerade as a coach for his new project.
Rock climbing was his new thing. I'd stayed in the car park, in his car, while he'd go see the other girls.
Mitchell turned his attention to his first rock climbing prodigy, 11-year-old Sophie Vivian.
He treated me as though I was special. He was very praising of me and my athletic ability, very hands-on, lots of hugs.
Although he wasn't employed by the AIS as a coach, people believed Mitchell was associated with the Institute sports programs.
He presented himself as a coach of high esteem. He did wear an AIS branded jacket, which you could buy from any sort of souvenir shop. He had ACT rock climbing embroidered on it.
He seemed to know everybody at the Australian Institute of Sport, seemed very well connected everywhere we went. So I never questioned his legitimacy.
Sophie quickly became a junior national champion.
There was always a shadow over my achievements because of what was going on in the background.
Mitchell was sexually assaulting Sophie, crimes that went on for years.
He used her in a sense that, look what I can achieve. I made Sophie great.
It's very hard to come to understand that you were effectively, I was a lure.
By the late 90s, two other former gymnasts had joined the squad, Jessie Riley and Libby Hall. Mitchell sexually assaulted both.
That was his entire life. He committed his entire life to this offending.
In 2002, Mitchell was employed by the Australian Federal Police as a sport and recreation officer based at the Police and Citizens Youth Club in Canberra. The job gave him access to another victim who Mitchell assaulted over 3 years.
It's not behaviour that I've found in other investigations. It was incredibly calculated.
And yet, it could have been stopped. In 2003, one of Mitchell's victims had gone to the police about an assault.
She just had an outburst and she said that she had been sexually abused by Mitch, the climbing coach.
Lee Riley's daughter, Jessie, was one of the climbers assaulted by Mitchell.
We rang the police straight away and they said come in for an interview.
The police also interviewed Indepth Visser.
Did you tell them that he sexually assaulted you?
I told the police then about us having massages and sleeping in the same bed, about him rubbing himself against me.
Mitchell was interviewed by detectives and suspended from his AFP job. The following year, he resigned, and shortly after, the DPP decided not to prosecute him.
And do we know whether there was any pressure from the AFP for him to resign?
I don't know, and I can't talk to that. I wasn't involved in that investigation at the time. Hi, mate. We've got the...
Detective Sergeant Mick Woodburn was Paul Kalatz's supervising officer in the latest Mitchell investigation.
Why do you think the investigation didn't proceed to an arrest?
Again, I can't speak for the decision makers that were there at the time. What I can say is that the investigators involved did consult with our prosecutors at the time before the decision was taken.
Mitchell continued to coach and even helped set up a governing body, Sport Climbing Australia. He groomed and assaulted another young climber.
Sports Climbing Australia started to put pressure onto Mitch, and Mitch, of his own volition, left climbing for good in mid-2008.
I'm enraged. I'm very angry at Stephen Mitchell, but I'm angrier at the climbing community, at Sports Climbing Australia, at the AFP, at the AIS.
Sport Climbing Australia told 7:30 it doesn't have any record of concerns or formal complaints against Mitchell, and that his involvement with the organisation ended in 2007. Sport Climbing Australia says it now has a complaints policy in place and seeks to be extremely vigilant towards child protection. In a statement to 7:30, the Australian Sports Commission, which runs the Institute of Sport, said rock climbing was not an AIS program and Stephen Mitchell was never an AIS coach. The safety and well-being of athletes and children is central to everything the Australian Sports Commission does. Mitchell pleaded guilty to 6 counts of child sexual assault and today was sentenced to 13 years and 5 months in jail.
I've kept the secret mainly for everybody else's comfort, more than my own. And now, if I can just let it go and I can push it out, maybe it will land at the feet of the one person who actually needs to take some responsibility.
Proud of myself to have spoken up, been brave enough to tell my story, and I think that that's me forgiving my younger self as well and saying sorry.